Levels are going up and down. Okay, so hopefully this will be live. Hopefully this is coming on live. Yes, apparently it's all the lights are flashing in the right directions, so that's all good. Happy coding and hello coders. How are you all? Today we're going to tackle a little bit more to do with the project that we're creating for FreeCodeCamp. This is a PHP object-oriented project that I'm going to be building, and the vote is in that I asked people to vote on Twitter and on YouTube what kind of application they would like me to build, and the answer has been a resounding sort of yes for the invoicing app. So we're going to be building the invoicing app. But of course, before we get to that point, we actually have to build a framework for the invoicing app to work upon. So there's an awful lot of different components that I need to sort of build myself. So we're working through the router, but after that, we also need to deal with the ORM, the object relational map, the way in which we can communicate to MySQL, or MySQL, I should say. Stop saying MySQL. It is MySQL. Whatever. It's been a long day. It's also a Friday, and because it's a Friday, I am drinking beer. So cheers, everyone. This is a lovely, nice, fine ale. And it's very tasty. I was going to say something else then, but it's very, very tasty. So I've literally just got off of some other bits and pieces, so I really haven't set myself up for this yet. So I do need to start the Docker machine. Docker machine, if I can spell it. Docker machine start, and it's how to code well -OOP. I think it's OOP PHP, or is it PHP OOP? We'll find out in just a second. No, that seems to be working fine. Cool. And then once this is running, I'll make sure the containers are up and running, and then we'll run some tests. I should say, for those that don't know, I am the host of the How to Code Well YouTube channel, where I do teaching, which is more edited. It's more edited. It's a little bit more sort of, there's less fooling around. There's less mistakes and stuff. I also do a lot of courses for Pact, and I've done a course for Manning Publications where I was teaching Docker, and I was teaching for Pact. I was doing I've done 2 courses for them. I've done a clean coding course in Python that has just been sent to the publishers, and I've done a Microservices in Python, hands-on Microservices with Python with them. For Manning, I did the Docker in Motion course. And I also do a podcast. You can see on the screen here, on the linky thing, on the imagey thing, podcast every Friday. That's howtocodewell.fm. And obviously today is Friday, and today's podcast, I interviewed Stephanie Hulbert, and we were talking about virtual reality on the internet, on the web, and image and texture compression, and we were discussing all the things that she is getting up to in her company, Binomial, to help achieve better compression with those things. Some fascinating concepts and discussions and stuff that she's working on. So do check out the howtocodewell.fm website, and also if you listen to podcasts, check out the How to Code Well podcast too, because I interview people every Friday. And yeah, it's a ton of fun. It's a ton of fun. But today we're diving in to some code. So this machine's up and running. So I need to evaluate the machine to the shell, which means that I should be able to now do docker ps-a, which I can. They're all down at the moment. So if I did an ls just to make sure we're in the right place, let's do don't need to do that. Let's do a build, or an up hyphen build. Man, you're going to have to excuse me. I have this awful cough which just won't go. So I do apologize. Docker ps. Apparently they're up, but let's just check. PS-A. One of them is up. We don't worry too much about the MySQL one at the moment because we're not worrying too much about the ORM side of things at this stage. I will be worrying about that later on. And the first thing I want to do is I want to ensure that the unit tests that I wrote yesterday are still running, are still working. I mean, this is a great way of to just make sure that that everything is nice and stable before you work on it. So let's do right. Let's do what is it? Reverse search, because I can't remember what this all is. My memory's going. Vendor code set run. We're using Codeception, and we have a bunch of failures, and I think the failures are the acceptance tests. They are. So we're not worrying too much at that stage. Just worry about the units for now. That all works. The acceptance tests are failing because I'm kind of breaking the code as I go, making it a little bit more readable, a bit more streamlined, because I didn't like the way I actually implemented the whole routing mechanism. Okay, so we've got, 14 tests there, and they're all passing. That's all good. Still can't get rid of this deprecation warning, which is a pain. But hey, if anybody knows how to do that, then please do get in touch. It's probably some real tiny piece of config that I just need to sort of set. But let's take a look at the tests. So if we go to the unit tests, I believe we were working through the validation. And we put in validation type, type, and then we were looking at the method validator. That's correct. Yes, I do remember now. So you have to apologize. I have to apologize because I've been working on various projects. Well, not various, one project today, and I've just, you bury your head in it, and then you come out of it, and then you go, oh, I need to do another project today. So it's, yeah, it can be a bit disorientating. When one thing is written in one way and then you're dealing with something that's written in another way, your whole way of thinking changes. Anyway, this is in SRC, and we are in the helper, and we are in the root, and we have validation, and this is the validation, and I believe this loops through a bunch of validators that we supply, which we are. And you can also add a validator there. I'm just going to sort of... let's knock this down for now. I don't need that for the minute. Let's just make this a little bit smaller just to fit it on the screen. Okay, so then we have the interface validator. So we have isValid and setRoot. Okay, yeah, I'm happy with that. Then we are testing the method validator, which checks the method being get or post of the roots. Fine. Okay, that's cool. So that checks isValue is correct. And then we have isValid, which does a bunch of these things. Why did I do that? Why didn't I put it in one method? That's right, because perhaps you're checking multiple values rather than, or multiple things against that. Okay, all right, I can see that. It has a little bit of extendability there, I suppose. I must have been in a... Yeah, okay, that's cool. So we're testing the method validator, and what else are we testing? Validation type. Nothing else. We're just testing the method validator. All right. Okay. Let's check another thing then. So we're on method. Let's test the... Let's go wild and test the controller validator, or check the controller validator. So what was I wanting to test in the controller? So the roots are defined like so, right? So we have controller, and we're passing in that. So what am I intending on doing here? Okay. Oh, yes. Yes. So the type home class goes to type PHPstan. Stop that. Type and then home. Okay. So this is actually a class, and then that would be the action index, which we are supplying like so. Excellent. So that's the method that we're checking. Right, so let's go ahead and test this controller. And I guess what we can do is make sure that the controller actually exists. This means we're going to be playing around with some reflection. And I must admit, reflection is something that I really haven't been playing with for, I can't remember the last time I played with reflection. I'm sure I have at some point in my 19 odd years of being a web developer, working on PHP and all that stuff. But I can't off the top of my head remember when the last time was. Nor can I remember what other classes I need to run. So this could be fun. Right, so this is controller validator, and its returning is valid. Okay, so I'm not going to fill out the code yet. I'm just going to write the test first. So it's a little bit of a sneaky TDD-ness. Control C, Control V is your friend. Controller. Add. I think for every class I build, I'm going to have a drink. Deal? Okay, controller test. Do. Let's move that over there. Excuse me. Where's the Windows gone? There we go. So this needs to be changed to be controller validator test, and we'll scroll down. We don't need to have that anymore. So let's remove that one and that one, because these were the methods. Controller validator test, nice. Validation type, validation controller. And what are we going to be testing? Well, we need to test whether or not the first thing we need to test is whether or not there is something in there, and then we need to test if the thing that is in there is actually a class. Yeah. Okay, so first of all, we need to do test does class exist? Or instead of class, let's be a little bit more specific. Does controller exist? So we create the root, but this time we're only worrying about the controller. So I'm going to do set controller, and the controller I'm going to test. Oh, I'm doing it up here. Sorry. Is home controller. There we go. Home class. Okay, so then we do new controller validator, and we're passing in the set root. And then we are checking whether or not that is true. So let's change it to that. So does exist. And we need to bring this up. Come on, up we go. Run those tests. Have a cough, and yeah, we have one failed, and that it would be because this here is valid, must return a boolean, and none is returned. So this is the failing test that we've got. I'm just going to put that on that line. So let's go to the controller validator and fill that out. So let's create a class called public function does exist. We pass in the value, which is a string, I think, I hope. Yeah, so this here we need to do some sort of reflection. So as I mentioned before, when I was looking at the other one, I usually do is valid, and I usually set the default to be false. So we're going to do that here too. This will all come a little bit more apparent when I do it. So, okay, that's cool. Is valid, is false. So now let's try and remember reflection. Let's try and remember the old reflection. Okay, so do I have to instantiate a reflection? So let's do R is equal to new reflect. Nope. It would help if I knew how to spell reflection. Reflection class. And then you apparently need to supply an argument. So what are the properties of R? Get method, get name, get constant, get constructor, blah, 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 and all of that jazz. Get reflection, get name, get method, get name. Does that have any documentation? Constructor reflection class does all of those things. Either a string containing the name of the class to reflect or an object. Okay, so that's the string that we can pass through. So let's go back to here. Oh, come on. No, there we go. That's what I wanted. So we pass in the string to here. That's throwing an unhandled exception. So what is throws a reflection exception if the class does not exist? So we could look for that. So we could instantiate a class, or we could do a reflection, and we could look out for that. So if that throws an exception, we could put that in perhaps a try catch, and then return false if that is the case. We could do that. That seems okay, maybe. PHPstan is not letting me click through to that class, which is annoying. So let's go up here, up here. Right, so we could do a try. That's what I was looking for. We could do a try and a catch. And we're Magic Mouse is going nuts. It's more drunk than I am. Exception. And that's E for exception, or just put in exception. And then what we do, well, if we're setting it as false to default, then that will be false. So we could therefore set that to be false in there, and then return and set that to be true at the top. But let's just see, can we do this without reflection? Get class, is that going to work? That requires an object. Parameter object. Yeah, I don't want to instantiate the controller. I just want to check whether the controller exists. So I think we are going to have to do it through this mechanism. And then we return is valid. Now, the exception was slightly different, wasn't it? It was the... hang on, I can't remember it. It was the... here, reflection exception. There we go. So that's the does exist affair. Right, and the reason why, I'll show you in a minute why I've done this. Let me just tidy this up first, because I think this is a bit nasty. Let's move that up in here. So we do use, boom, take that off, and then use reflection. No, that's obviously not spelled right. Reflection exception. Get the imports in. take those out. All right, that's a little tidier. Although R is obviously just, I don't think you can do an empty new. I think you do need to assign it to something. Oh, we'll have a go in a minute. Okay, so then that does, so then that is, so if false, 1, 2, 3, empty. So if it isn't empty, which is, hang on a minute, get class name. That's what we need. Class name is equal to, actually I'm going a mile a minute. I shouldn't be playing with this thing. What I should be doing is going straight down to the controller validator, and we're testing does exist at the moment, and we're passing in a string. So we don't even need to instantiate that at this point, not at all. Bear with me just a second. Just had a message on the old YouTube comments. I'll just answer it now on the Twitch thing on here, and then I'll follow it up. But someone has asked, what is the Docker command to copy a folder into a Docker container? And the command is docker cp, because you're doing a copy. And it's, if I remember rightly, it's source and then the destination. So if you're copying a folder, that would go at you would do docker cp, then the folder you're copying, and then you would do the container name, and then colon, and then the slash, and then the file path of where you want to copy that to. So I will certainly answer that back, but I'm just, I've got half an eye on the old comments. So I did do a whole video on that, and I'll provide the link to that when I'm done here. So where was I? Controller validator. What was I doing? Oh yeah, checking whether it exists. So there's no actual need to do any of this. In fact, I could just bung this in here, and then do that, and then remove this, and then remove that. Right? Okay, so that should now check that the home class exists through the power of reflection. Now bear in mind that I haven't done reflection in a very, very long time, so this might fail flat on its face, but let's try. No, it doesn't. Okay, cool. I'm getting thirsty now. I need to create another class, and I don't want my beer to go stale. So that's cool. Okay. So we're using reflection. I just want to double check. Can I remove this? Because this is dirty, because this is an unused variable. Can I just assign it to nothingness? Can I just do that? Is that going to break and blow up? No. All right. Okay. So that's cool. However, my confidence in this is limited, because of my knowledge of reflection is also limited. So let's just play with this a little bit more. This is the controller validator test. Okay, so that checks whether it does exist. Let's check whether it doesn't exist, and see what happens. So let's do does not exist. Does not, N-O-T, that's how you spell not. And we're going to make this up. We're just going to go not underscore found, right? It's going to try and instantiate a class, or not instantiate, it's going to try and do reflection against not found. Let's see if that works. Or so this should fail, which it does. which it does, which is good. So we can set assert to false. I think the drinking rule should be for every time this passes, I get a drink. Actually, no, that could be quite dangerous. Let's not do that. But I'm going to take a slurp because my throat is killing me. Lovely IPA. A nice IPA. So yeah, it does exist. So we're making sure that that returns false. So I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. Now the reason why we are checking does exist instead of is valid is because up in the controller validator, we are also checking whether or not it is empty. And I think checking if it exists or not implies that there is something there, which, you know, you're having to pass in a string. We're forcing a string in here. So I think they're two separate responsibilities. So what I could do, just have an itch, is I could do if false empty passing in. Oh yeah, we need the class name. So we do need root. No, this is this root. This root. And then it's, whoops, this root get controller. So that's the controller or class name. Boom, boom, boom. So if this is not empty, then we do this does exist, passing in the class name again. And then what we do is because we're returning a Boolean here, and I should do this for good practice, we do, and I'll talk about practice in a minute. Good practice. Ah dear. We haven't used PHPstan yet, have we? No, we haven't. This could be a long night. Is valid. Okay, so we're checking that's kind of like essentially the first check. So if it's false, if it's not false, sorry, if that is not false, then we are running that. So, okay, so therefore, down in the bottom depth of the tests, we can now also test for empty. So let's do controller empty. Test controller empty. And what we're going to do, I've removed that, haven't I? That's silly me. I need this in here, like so. Boom. So we're just not going to set any, we're just going to instantiate a new root, and we're going to pass the validator, and we're just going to do set root, and we're going to pass in the root. There we go. And then we're just going to do is valid, and we don't do anything like that. So that needs to return a false. All right. So if that was true, we should fail. Which it is. Setting false is true. So that needs to return false because that is completely empty and I can't spell false. That's cool. Okay, next test is that we want to ensure that the whole thing is wired up together. So let's grab that, bung that in there. Then we need to do controller, blah, 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 router, root, and then set controller, pushing in home, home class, there we go. And this controller empty, controller exists. I don't know, it's a bit sort of, or controller set, because it is set. I don't know. I've got another does not exist thing, so I'm a bit sort of wary of mixing them a bit too much. So we're creating that, we're setting the controller, and then this now should become true. Bish bosh bash, that now works. Okay, cool. Sorry, another message. Do. Awesome. My cold. Okay, so I'm confident that the controller is now validated and tested. Let's now move on to the action, because that's the next one. We'll do it in a very similar fashion. The action is here. This is supposed to be the action or the method that we call upon the controller. So again, we need to check via reflection that this method is in play. So let's do that somehow. I don't know. I'm just making this up as I go. Action. No, this test is down here. Here we go. So we do action validator. Okay, the action validator, very similar to the controller validator. We're going to still have the we're going to have that as does action exist, right? We're going to do that as does not action exist. That's not very good English, but okay. And then does not action empty. Again, that's a bit weird. Does not. I think I might tidy this up at some point, because this is all not good. But it's the similar thing. All right, we're checking whether or not that it's empty. Then we're checking whether or not it actually exists. And the beauty of setting up the validators like this is that with the validation, when you're adding the validators, you can obviously do them in order or in a particular order. So you would add the controller validator before you add the method validator, which means that you're checking whether the controller exists before you check whether or not the action exists, right? Because there's no point in checking if the action exists if the controller doesn't exist anyway. So you can manipulate how the order in which these validators work. It's not at all anywhere near as sophisticated as the constraints that you get in good old Symfony, because there you can do chains and all of this stuff. And I'm just making this up as I go, so it's not. I'm not, as I've mentioned many times before, I'm not looking to replace anything that's out there. I'm using this as a means of testing, or not testing, teaching, I should say, teaching object orientation. But I need to build this first, get happy with it, get comfortable with it, obviously make sure it's nice and tested, and then I'll test, and then I'll teach it. And I'll do so in a very sort of I'll do so in a very edited manner. All right, so there certainly won't be any beer drinking. Method validator, action validator, that's what we're working on. So what I need to do, let's work on, I tell you what I'll do, let's work on one at a time. So I'm going to comment out all of these. That wasn't a comment. That's a comment. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do a find and replace of that. So in PHPstorm, you can do a right click, and then I think it's find usages. Is it find usages? Oh, hang on. I had this problem yesterday. It's too small for the screen. All right, I'll just paste that in. It's because of the way I've set up the stream. I'm trying to make it so it's more readable for you guys, and less readable for me. So okay, does action exist? All right, so we change that to be an action validator. And we're going to have to change the, where are we here? Okay, and then we're checking whether or not that exists. So we know that that is going to be an index, but we also need to be aware of the controller in which the action belongs to. So we are going to need to create the root for this, because there's two properties that are required. So we have root, set root, or sorry, set controller of the root, and then we can do set action, and we're going to pass that in as index. New action, and then we're going to have to set the root to the validator. Come on. Set root. Root. Okay. And then we're going to have to do does exist. And there's no need to put that in because they're all encapsulated in the root. So that's going to blow up in my face. Yeah, one error. And that's, again, it's because the does exist doesn't exist on the action validator. So we're going to go into there, and we're going to do a public function does exist. We're not putting in any, you know, this isn't whatever language that was in. And we're going to return a Boolean. So again, I'm going to do is valid. We're going to set that to be false, and then we're going to return it. But at this point, we are able to capture. We can do this this root, and then we can do get controller. So that's the controller name or class name. Okay. And then we also do action is equal to this root get action. And then we need to check, we need to do a similar thing as we did before. So we do something like, we do R is equal to new reflection class. Is there a reflection method? Ooh. Okay. 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 This is new territory for me. So let's have a look at that. What do we do? We pass it in a class. The class is the mixed. Okay, that doesn't really mean anything, does it? Is it a string? Is it an object? Class name, or object. All right. Instance of the class. Okay, and then the name of the method, or the method fully qualified name. So it would be like home : index. And then if the class is missing, if the class argument is missing, okay. And then it throws a reflection error exception. So we can do the same sort of tactic as we did before. Okay, that's quite handy. And of course I'm in the wrong place. And of course PHPstorm is not going to allow me to access that file. So I go up here. Okay, so what we can do is we can pass in the class name as the first parameter. And then we pass in the action as a second parameter. Again, we're going to do this in a try catch. I'm just going to grab, because I say it's late. I don't want to be copying. I don't want to be doing stuff. I'm just going to change. I say, and then I ruin this. So let's just knock all that out and bung that in. Yes, I want to import those things. And this is reflection method. And we're passing in the class name first. And then we're passing in the action as well. Okay, cool. Oh, yeah, I need to change that import to be the method. Another slurpy slurp. Oh. Okay, so we don't need to worry about that. And we don't need to worry about that. Awesome. Okay. Okay, so let's run this and see if it's if it falls over. No. Okay, cool. We're on the 19th test. Confidence is growing. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, so now we need to do a similar thing to do with the isValid. So we scroll to the method validator, and we here we go. No, what am I doing? Action validator. I was looking at the wrong thing. Yeah, so assert true, that does exist because we're putting in index and then class. So it's looking for the method index within the home class itself. Awesome. Okay, the next one. What's the next one? Does not exist. Okay, fine. Let's put that in. Change this to be action. And action. And obviously action. Okay. And we need to also pass in. We need to create a root. And I'm just going to put in the same not found jobby on there. And we're going to hit save. And we're going to run the tests again. 20, that's all good. It's all green. It's all good. It's all okay. Awesome. So that's going well. Let's just bring that out a little bit to make a little bit of room. Next. Test does not action empty. Who on earth wrote that? It doesn't make any sense. Change that to be action. Do I need to do this? Assert false. Okay, yeah, I do. Action. Action. That should be is invalid, right? Because we're checking if it is invalid, is invalid, rather than that silly class name, that method name I had. So that's action, and I should change the other one as well whilst I'm at it. But let's just focus on this one for a minute. Action set root. We need to do the similar thing as we've done before. Although, do we need to do that? No, because that should just throw a wobbly, should throw a false. However, it's going to fail because we haven't actually returned anything yet. So let's go back into here, and this is the problem. So here we need to do something like this. But does exist. All right. I guess at this point we could also do if false 1 2 3. Then we do this root get action. So if this isn't false, so if we do have something in here, so it is doing a check. You know, there's no point in going into this point if that does fail. And I suppose what we could do. Yeah, okay, let me refactor this in a minute. I've got an idea of how I can refactor this. So again, we need to do is valid is equal to false. Change that to be is valid. And then do a return of is valid. All right. So let's run this and see. Okay, so that's passed. Is that a good thing or not? Yep, because we're checking that is invalid and we haven't actually set anything up yet. So that has failed. That has passed because it has failed. So I had an idea for refactoring, didn't I? Oh yeah. Go to here. So what we could do is we could grab the class name. So we could do this, this root get controller, and we could also do action name is equal to this root. Get action, and we could supply both of these as parameters into does exist. And then we could then check that. This means, of course, that we've decoupled this root from the does exist, which means that I can pass these in, which makes it slightly easier to test. I mean, I'm going a little bit overboard here. Class name. But there's only 2 parameters I need, so you know it's not like it's not major. So we've got class name and action name. I need to change class name here. I need to change action name in there. I also need to put in some better comments, like so. Marvelous. Okay. Now, this is going to fail because I've refactored this, but I haven't actually updated the tests, and there's actually 2 errors. So I need to solve that. One of them is one little change that I've done because I refactored it is action validator. No. It's here. Action validator test. I need to change the way. Here, you see this is all in grey. So at this point, we don't need to do. We don't need to instantiate a root and then set it. So it makes it slightly easier to test in that regard because, because you know, I don't need to do any of this stuff. And you want to make sure your tests are nice and clean, you know. The smaller the test, the better, because then you can really get precise and finite. So that's what we're doing here. If you can see. Woo. There was another one that broke, and it was this one. So I need to do... So, and notice that I'm only testing the does exist method, not the is valid method. The is valid method works on the does exist method. Again, and we don't need to have the root, and we don't need to set it. We just need to make sure that that is the case. So let's run this test, make sure that they all work after all of those things. They do. We're now on the 21 tests. That's awesome. If my unit tests were able to were actual people they could drink in the US. I think that's the thing with the US. Okay. Okay, what's next? Okay, so we're checking if that is wrong. So we should also check whether that is that actually runs through. So let's do that. Boo 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 boo. Test is valid. All right, so this is the test that makes sure that everything is as we expect. So that is valid. And we're going to change that to be is in valid. Okay, so in this case we do need to set up a root. We need to make sure that everything is wired up. So we do root, we do set controller, and that's home class, root, set action, and we do index. And that should return false. Sorry, true. True, not true. Oh dear. All right, hit save. Run this again, and we are failing. Why are we failing? Why has that failed? I thought that would have been true. False is true. Action validator test is valid. Okay, so we're setting the controller and we're setting the action. Action validator is valid. We're getting the controller name and their and then so if false, that was setting that to valid, and then we do false action name. Yep. And we also should it's right in front of me, isn't it? That needs to be empty. I'm not evaluating that action name is a boolean and it's false. We should also do it's not just the action name we want to check. We also want to check that we have the controller as well, the class name. All right, let's run that. Yep, that works. Awesome. Okay. So I know that there's other little tinkering tests I could do. I could do like, does it have a class? Does it have an action but doesn't have a controller? Does it have a controller but doesn't have an action? That kind of thing. We could do that, but we kind of know it works. So, I won't, just for speed. But really, as a if you're doing this whole TDD thing, you kind of really need to do that. So I made a change to the code there, but I didn't write a failing test to make sure that I had something to back up. So I kind of came out of that for a little bit. But hey ho. Okay, so I think that covers the action for now. That's cool. We don't need these things. What now? Okay, so we've got the action, we've got the controller, we've got the method. The next thing on the table is the pattern. Now the pattern, what is the pattern? Let's have a look. That is going to be the URL, the URI with the expression. Okay, so how do we test that? Well, that's going to be really tricky because you can't really check whether a regex is correct. I don't think. And yeah, I don't think. Maybe you can. You know, whether the regex is invalid. Maybe you could do like some sort of reflection upon a regex, sort of in a manner that checks the structure of the regex is correct. Although that's going to be really tricky because we have like a lot of things in between. So maybe what we should do is just keep it simple for now, and just make sure that there is something in the pattern. That would help at the very least. That's like the least thing we need to check, I think. But we'll do so anyway. So we're just going to grab the action, bung it in here, or grab that and put that as pattern. Okay, change that to be pattern validation or validator test. We don't need that. I think this is going to be nice and small. So we're just going to remove all of these things. Let's make a little bit of room. And we're just going to do test is invalid. Okay, so this is a pattern validator test. So at the very least, this is going to have two tests. One that checks that something is invalid and one that checks that something is valid. Is invalid. So let's remove that and do validator just is that's not the test, is it? Pattern validator. Sorry. Pattern validator is valid. And we're going to check that that is false. And we're going to just set that up as so. Let's just make sure that that is false. So we're going to run that. That's going to fail because we're not actually passing anything through, which is fine. And again, we're going to do, well, we could just, if we're only worrying about the simplicity of this, we could do a return of empty this root get pattern, because that's going to return true or false. It's going to return true if it is empty, and it's going to return false if it isn't empty, I think. Yeah. I think. Call to a member get pattern on null. Get pattern is null. Okay. Is it? No, pattern is a string. Get pattern. Oh. Oh, I see. Sorry, I'm going a little bit too far ahead of myself. You do need to put in a root, and you just have to keep the root blank. So let's do root is equal to new root. Oh, no, not the variable root, the class root. It's an instance, and then we just do validator, and then we set the root to that. Okay. Still failing. Testing that true is false. So we should assert that that is false. Is it? It's not an empty string though, is it? Hang on. Hang on a minute. Let me just double check something a minute. Let's just go to pattern validator and then do boom. is valid. And we're going to just create a root. Set pattern. And the pattern is just going to go /. So that should be true. Is valid. Ooh. Oh. There we go. Okay, that's solved that. Now we could go a little bit more advanced with this. For example, this pattern of a URI, that is invalid. And there's also a lot of other invalid patterns that we could look for. I'll have a think of that. That's moving into some crazy regex territory. But for now, I think I might keep it as is, just for the simplicity of this, and also the fact that I know that I need to get this out the door soon. Right. So at this point, we all have these tested action controller method pattern tested to some degree. We have 24 tests. But what we don't have is PHPstan. I did attempt to show you what PHPstan could do the other day, but it failed because I didn't have my Composer autoloader set up. Foolish me. But now I put them all in the PSR4. I should, hopefully, fingers crossed, be able to do vendor bin PHPstan. This is a static analyzer, and we're going to run it against src helper root. We're going to just run it against the roots. It's not defined. It's not defined. Oh, no, of course not. I need to do... I can never spell that right. Okay, and that's found one error. Okay, so we're running this on the default level, and it's found one error, and the error is class app root does not have a constructor and must be instantiated without any parameters. So that's a problem with the processor. So this is an awesome tool that I recommend everybody who is a PHP developer use. PHPstan will do static analysis against your code without even running your code, and will check and tell you if things are wrong. This is fantastic, and it saves a lot of time in the long run, and it makes sure that your code is nice and clean and can be used by other developers. It's something that I've been trying to put into the builds of my client projects. I'm a freelance developer, and I work with a lot of clients and stuff. A lot of legacy code. I've been working on a tremendous amount of legacy code. PHPstan has really helped me to understand the complexities of that code. This is running on the default level, as I mentioned. Let me just try and spell that correctly before I... A-N-A. I got the L in the wrong way. So if I run that again, we got one error. But if I change the level, so if I did level equals 7, for example, it goes in a little bit more depth and detail and crunches it. So now we've found 12 errors. All right, so we can see that there's, and this goes into real nitty-gritty fine detail. So here we're saying that there's a problem with the PHP tag param has an invalid value. Okay, so it even looks at the PHP doc blocks. And this is really good if you're using annotations in, say, Symfony or Laravel. So I strongly recommend this. And it's finding all sorts of interesting issues that I would like to work my way through. And that was level 7. So, I mean, we did level 1. No, we did level 0 beforehand. So that's just 1. And then you got level 1. That's 5. Level 2. That's 8. Level 3. That's, again, 8. 4. 8. 5. 8. 6. 10. 7 is 12. 8. We don't have level 8. We can configure our own rules using the config level 8 .neon config file if we have one, but we don't. So we're gonna start with level 0, and the idea, especially if you're working on a legacy application, is you just sort of work your way up the numbers. Make sure that everything in level 1 or level 0 is fixed before you move on to level 1. Before you move on to level 2, and so on and so forth. So don't just run this on level 8 or 10 or whatever your highest level is and go, oh dear, this is all broken. Start small and gradual and increment your way up. So level 1, we have this. We have class app root. Root does not have a constructor and must be instantiated without any parameters. So this is on the processor on line 49. So what's going on line 49 on the processor? Bearing in mind that the code that I'm running, I'm not actually dealing with the processor at the moment. So let's break this down a little bit and go to root, and I think it was validation. Let's try that, and we go to level 0. Is there anything wrong in validation? No, that's everything in validation is fine on level 1, on level 0. So let's do 1. No, 2. One issue on level 2, and that is the PHP doc tag param has an invalid value on line 29 of the method validator. It's got but I think this means that the actual signature is invalid. So let's go to that. So that's method validator in here. This is line 29, which is here. So we have params, values. Notice I don't actually have a data type here, a type. So what is that? What is values? Nor do I have a data type here. Well, values is an array. It has to be an array because we're doing a loop. All right, so we need to set that to be an array, and we need to set that to be an array. So then we hit save. This is something that is really good that you can do like on a Friday afternoon, where once all your Jira tickets are done, once all of your bugs are done for the week, and you've got a couple of hours spare, just run this and just make sure that things are working. So now we fixed that. That's cool. In good practice, what we also need to do is run the tests again, just to make sure that those tests all work. So let's just press back on the old keyboard a little bit. There we go. Run unit. So that's fine. Okay, let's move up to level 3. That's fine. Level 4. That's fine. Level 5. That's fine. Level 6. That's fine. Level 7. That's fine. And I don't think we've got level 8. No. Okay, so that's, PHPstan likes this. PHP unit Codeception likes this too. Right. So that's cool. And notice how I'm sort of doing this whilst sort of traversing the folder structure. So, I can go back a level. Let's change that to level 7. Boom. And now we've got 11 errors. I mean, I've been in projects where we have like thousands of errors, right? So this is small fry. But when you get into that sort of hot water, the thing to do is go, right, I'm going to focus on this directory, I'm going to then focus on that directory, and so forth. And of course, changing some of these is fairly straightforward, but there can be larger issues that PHPstan picks up. Okay, let's now move to, where are we? We're on root. What else can we do in a root? Is there something else we can do? Because I don't want to do the whole processor and everything, because I know that that's going to break. So we've got validation. No, we can only do validation. We're at the folder of validation. But we can also do controller, right? So because that hasn't changed. So this is src controller. I'm going to just bring that back to level 0. Okay, that's fine. 1, 2. Oops. No. Ah, dear. Come on. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and we don't have 8. Okay, that's cool. So this is good. And normally what I would do is I would have this running automatically. You could even put this into a Git hook if you want to do some sort of post hook or commit hook or something like that. That would also work. I mean, you saw how quickly this was to do all this. Obviously, the bigger the code base, the slower this will be. So that's fine. Okay, so we've had a look at PHPstan, and we've had a look at all of that stuff. So we can now move into something a little bit different, can't we? Because we've got the validation. We can validate the routes that we've got up here. I guess the next thing we need to deal with is the factory and how this all hangs together. This is something that I was playing around with yesterday, I believe, where we had this make, and we were putting in the options, and we were making a route and returning that instance of that route based on the options that have been supplied. So just out of sanity's sake, let's just check the factory. So this is in root. Nope, this is in helper. Root, and it is factory.php, because you can do individual files if you want to, so that's fine. So we could do that. That's cool. And my way of thinking is that we would have the kernel. The kernel would get the roots from here, like we're doing on line 6. And then what we would do is we would loop over the roots and then go and create a route through the factory, something like that. The reason being is we've decoupled that from a very sort of like, what do you call it, functional programming type aspect, where we're calling upon classes to make other classes. Obviously, I could do a for each loop and then just set all the things, but because we got the validators, the factory can then make the validation calls. So that's what I kind of want to wire up next. I just want to check my messages a moment. I just want to double check something a minute. I want to make sure one of my websites is still running. Bear with me a mo. This is a bit of a spot check. Yeah, super quick, awesome. Okay, so hold on. Okay, so from the kernel, we want to do something a little bit like for each roots as root, and then we want to do something like root factory is equal to new factory, and then we do something similar to root factory and then make. So again, I'm just throwing this on the page just to get it out of my head a little bit. So we got the root factory. We're instantiating that, and then we're doing the for each, and then passing in the root, which is the for each one of these things. So one of these, right? Boom, boom, boom. What I would like to do is obviously move this into some sort of more object-orientated manner of doing this. So put this in another class, perhaps. Supplying all the roots or something, I don't know. But during the make routine, I also want to validate it. So I only want to make the roots if they are valid. That's the whole point of this. So let's think about how that works. So with the validation routine, we have set validators and we have add validators. So I'm going to need some form of setting all of these things up. And then there is this validate. So it validates, goes through all of the validators. We have an instance in the interface, sorry. So we check if that is the interface, and then we set the root, and then we check whether that is valid. And obviously we need to return something here. So I guess if we do, yeah, all right, okay, let's not worry about that at this stage. So I'm kind of thinking that we should maybe make a bootstrap file. Maybe. Let me think. Bootstrap. Because we need to actually configure this before we do other bits and pieces. So let's require the bootstrap, because this really shouldn't be in the kernel. To be honest, this sort of wiring up of stuff. So base path. Do we need to go in the base? No, we don't need to go in the base path, do we? We just need to go into require once, or require. It is require once. We only need to do it once. Bootstrap. .php. And we can then lift all of this. Well, we'll lift all of that at least, and let's just comment that out for now. I'm not worried about that for just a second. So let's go into the bootstrap, bung that in. So we're going to require the base path that I need to set. Let's I tell you what. Let's have bootstrap, and let's also have another file, and we're going to call this config, right? And in the config, we're just going to set some we're going to just set some defined bits and pieces. So we're going to define base path, and that base path is going to be not M, can't see the keyboard, bootstrap, and no, kernel, it's going to be U, so we're going to grab that. Config. Boom. Okay, so we got the base path set here, so we're going to define that like so, which means that we don't have to worry about faffing about with that anymore. So that goes straight into the base path. Awesome. So in the kernel, we can require the config above. We can do require once, and then config.php, and then this would be base path. Marvelous. Okay, so that sort of tidies that bit up a little bit. So then we after we've got the autoloader set, we can now do bootstrap. We don't need to use that anymore, I don't think. So, okay, we've done the config. Now we're in the bootstrap. The bootstrap has the base path already set. We're going to use factory, and we're just going to do a new factory, and then we're going to supply actual string. Oh, sorry, that needs to be, I'm actually requiring that, aren't I? Requiring once. There we go. Okay, so that's cool. We get the factory, then we loop over the roots, get the root, and we make the root and all that other jazz. So in the make routine, it's at this point we want to run the validation, but like I said beforehand, we need to set the validation up. So we need to somehow pass the validation in through there. We need to inject that. So let's just do a comment here. Let's just do create or make. Let's keep it consistent. Make roots. And then up here we do something like make validation. Make root validation, because you can have many types of validation. Okay, so we're going to go through the validation here. So we have, where are we? I need to see it. Okay, so we have action. Well, we could just do this, couldn't we? We could do validation. Did I call it validation? Yeah, validation. Validation is equal to new validation. So again, let's use that. So up here, like so. And then we do validation. We could do either add validator or set validators. I'm going to do set validators because we need to put in an array. And I'm just going to do new. Well, the first thing I'm going to check is the pattern. So new pattern validator. Again, we're going to use that. Our use cases might be a bit large in this file. Use douche, and we're going to bring it all the way to the type because I can do that. So that's the first one. The second one, we're going to do new. We'll do controller validation first. Then we'll do the action validator. So new. Okay, so we've set the validators up. We can now pass the validation, the whole validation routine, into here, into that. So we do that. We could even, if we wanted to, we could even pass in the roots as well. I'm just thinking out loud. And then we could even do root factory get roots. Perhaps. I'm thinking. I'm not sure. If that was the case, we would do public function, and it's a constructor. And the first, I can't remember now, what did I put through as the first thing? go back to the bootstrap. It was the roots, and then it was the way we're validating it. So the first one is an array of roots. Second one, whoops, is a validator. That's what validation. Okay, so we can then do whoa, magic mouse is going nuts. This. No, we don't do that in there. We do private roots, and that's just a blank array. I don't have PHP 7.4 installed today yet. I really need to do that. This roots is equal to roots. Then we do this. Well, first of all, we set it private validation. That is a validation. This validation is equal to validation. Okay, so now we have that. We can then do so we can make a single root, or we can make a collection of roots. I'm going to change that to be make root, and I'm going to change public function. I'm going to have a public function of make collection. Again, it's going to be an array of a collection of roots. And we're going to return an array of roots, and we're going to do a for each of roots as root data. I don't know, not Python. And then we do this make root, passing in the root data, like so. Okay, and then we can return the collection. So yeah, or something. And at this point, with the making of the root, we set all of these things, but then we do this validate of the root. So that is going to loop, is going to do, we pass in the root, it gets the validators that we've added to the validation routine, and then it checks whether it is valid. So we need to return, we need to set is valid on this, and we need to do is valid is equal to false on that, just as default. And then what we do under here is if false 1 2 3 is valid, then we break. We come straight out of that for each loop, and then we return is valid. So in the first case, it's always going to be false. We loop through each of these validators, and then we set the root to the validator. Then we validate that root, and we return true or false based on whether that is the case. If it is false, then we break, which means we don't go any further. We don't validate the next root. We simply break, and then we return is valid. So that now returns a Boolean, and we can do something like that. Okay, so I know I'm going a bit like crazy, and I've kind of left the testing in the dust, but I've going through the process in my head. I like to get it out on code, and then I'll probably do a bit of refactoring, do a bit of testing maybe later. Okay, so we got factory. It's doing the validation. It's returning the root, but I'm only going to return the root if it is valid. So in this case, we're going to have a mixed return type. Well, it's going to be either null or it's going to be the root. There's pipe. Question mark. So we do is valid on here. And we do if. Well, we can do return and we can do a ternary operator here. So if is valid, then we return the root. If not, we return null. Okay, so here we make the root, and if the root, if it can't be valid, if it's not valid, then we return null. So we obviously need to bubble this up, because we can supply a collection of roots to this, which means that we need to double check the return of this. This is getting quite complicated now. This is getting quite complicated now. So let's do, so that would be root. That's not roots, is it? And we can do if root is an instance of root, then we would add this to the collection. So let's go up here. Why do we have an array of roots? Because we are doing them in here. See, I don't like that. I don't like that one bit, because now we're going to have an array of a collection of roots that have been validated. No, I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Nope. No, thank you. Goodbye. Nope. Not happening. Not happening. Instead, what we're going to do is, so we have make collection of roots. I'm going to change that to be a static, so public static function. Make root. Trouble is, because it's static, it means that I can't do this validation because it's static. Okay. 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 Yeah, this is a gotcha. This is a gotcha. How do I get around this? I don't like the fact that I can just pass in roots through the constructor. That's not tidy in my head. I want to add a root. Not make a root, add a root. Okay, so I need to either return the root to something, which then does the validation, or I have the validation as static, and that's going to get problematic. So I'm not going to do that. So add root, I guess we return the root. But what are we returning it to? What are we returning it to? Unless Yeah. Okay. When you get into these kind of situations, it's always best to make either another method or another class or an interface or something that decouples this. So I think what I'm going to do is we're going to have a process method, right? And the process method, we take a root. And it's at this point we do the validation. So I'm just going to do this validation, validate of the root. Okay, so this is going to be is valid. So then we do if is valid. This isn't Python. If is, you can tell I'm getting tired because I'm syntax is going out of my head. And then we can wire this up. So if that is valid, then we wire it up. So we have, instead of roots up here, we're going to have a collection of roots. Well, we could just have roots, right? So these are the roots that have been processed. So if it is valid, we do this roots, and then we add the root. Obviously, we need to handle and inform the user that the validation has failed somehow. But that's the process. And I guess with the add root, I could just do this. Oh, no. That would mean it's not static, but I can live with that. And also, we do this add root. There we go. So the add root adds the root and also has the responsibility of processing it. Is that comfortable in my head? It's doing more than just adding a root, isn't it? Although it's adding a root to the validated root. So yeah, no, that is comfortable in my head. Yeah. I mean, we could even call this validate. And all we're doing is we're calling upon the validate of the validation and then checking whether that is the case and then putting it in here. Although validate would, no, that's not right. Let's go back to process. Yeah, and then let's just return. No, we don't need to return anything. Let's just void it. That's fine. We don't need to do that. In fact, this could even be protected, or it could even be private. This, we don't need to expose this to anything. Let's I think for tidy's sake, let's put that up in here. I like to keep all my public classes together. Public methods. I mean, public methods together. Okay, so that kind of works a little bit. We're in the we're in the factory. I'm going to run PHPstan against the factory again. Yeah, that's fine. Just for sanity's sake. Okay, so we've done the bootstrap, and we're not passing in roots anymore. We've just got the validation, and we also have a get roots mechanism. Well, we have make collection, don't we? Is that the right word? Make collection. We're making a collection of roots. I think we should just call this make roots. Passing in the roots. I mean, that would just makes it easier, doesn't it? So make roots. I'm going forward and back here. I do apologize, but I'm trying to naming things is difficult in programming. Yeah, make root. Make root adds a root. Hang on. Whoa. That's make factory. It should be make roots. Make roots. I mean, you could say that could be process roots, but you know, let's not argue that. So, back in the bootstrap, we're making the roots. That would then go off and validate those roots too. So we could do roots get root roots, but now we've come to the point where we need to actually hand off the expression. So we could have in the factory I don't think it's in the factory, is it? I want a class that is used to we send the current URI and parse that out, get the path, and then it something happens to go through all the patterns to make sure that they are they are correct. So, and it's not a factory. The factory's responsibility is to generate the roots based on the past array of roots and validate each one to make sure that they are correct. That is the responsibility of the factory. Nothing else. It's not doing anything in terms of dealing with the request. So, do we now focus on the request, maybe? What the terrible things that we built were the mapper. The mapper, yeah. We were passing in the current URI, getting the parsed URL, and then doing this hideous shenanigans. So we kind of at this stage. I think what I need to do is have a request method. Yeah. Okay. I think that's what I'm going to do. I just want to double check that the tests and everything work. That's good. I've done a lot of change. No, we have a problem here. Okay, what's the problem? Let's fix these. Too few arguments on factory constructor. 0 is passed. On factory test on line 67. So we did test the factory. This is where I see that we're going to... Yeah, that's a problem, isn't it? When you start getting into the case where you're having to instantiate a class just to get another blank class to run, it's it gets a bit problematic. You could almost create it in a mechanism that doesn't require the validation. So we would get around this issue. On the factory method, validation could be set to null by default, and then we check if the instance is validation. That would be good if there was different ways of validation, but there's no need for that, because then at that point you would create an interface. You would pass the interface in, or pass the instance of that in, and check for that. But that is a bit overboard. You could also, instead of using the constructor, you could use a setter. So you would set the validation, but you would have to enforce that there is validation before you do the validation. So that's a bit troublesome. This is a problem with having the responsibility of validation in the factory. So to get around this, and if you think of the way of single responsibility and separation of concerns and all that jazz, the factory is what is the factory doing? What is the purpose of the factory? Well, the purpose of the factory is to build routes based on an array of routes. It doesn't mean that they have to be valid routes, right? It just means that they need to be routes. So this is where the code smell is, where we're having to process the route, because this enforces a dependency upon the validation. So without this, that test would work. So to get around that, I'm thinking as I'm talking. To get around that, you have some beer, and then you think a little bit more. No, to get around that, what you would do is like I mentioned before, you create another class, you create another interface or something that creates the contract between the factory and the validation routine, or you create a class in between that does that brings those two things together, and I think that's probably what I would do. So we have the factory's responsibility is only to build routes. Okay, that's all it's doing. It shouldn't be processing the routes. It just builds the routes, regardless of whether they are correct. So if we remove that, so to get around this, what we could do is we could do a. We've already got a processor, haven't we? Here. I don't want to create another processor, but I want to create a sort of it's kind of like you pass in the routes that are generated from the factory. So what would happen is that you would have this wouldn't be required. That whole logic would go somewhere else, and this wouldn't go in here at all. In fact, we wouldn't need a constructor. We wouldn't need any of this stuff. Well, we would definitely need the routes, because that's what we're going to be returning. So that creates the route. Let's do route is equal to this, and then, or this roots is equal to that, and here we're just going to return this, the instance of, if I can spell it. So make roots returns the factory. It's not going to return an array. It's just going to return a factory. No, sorry. No, it will return an array. It will return this roots. And that will be this roots with that. So it will return an array. Okay. So the idea is that you pass in the array of roots, and then that will generate you the roots, and that will the root objects, and then that would be returned. So that's fine. The add root is fine, but it's this problematic thing here. So what I'm thinking is that in the bootstrap we would have we wouldn't need that. We would do roots is equal to something or other. So these OBJs, objects. Or yeah, just call it roots. So we can call that root data, roots data, or root data, just for clarity's sake. And then we need to sort of palm this off to something. So we need to go, we need to create another class and inject the validation and the array of roots, and then that becomes the process of validation. So we're decoupling it from the factory, which means that this test will then run. So we could call it root checker, maybe. Let's just call it checker for now. I know it's not the best name in the world. I'm just going to copy that over. Actually, no, it's a validator. We just call it a validator. That would be easier, wouldn't it? Validator. And we don't need that. We need to do validate. Validator has a validate. And we pass in an array, then we loop over. So what we do is we can do public function, the constructor. The constructor has validation that we pass in. Like so, do. And then this validation is equal to validation. That's good. And then we do validate, and it's at this point we do this validation, validate, and we pass in the root, and so we need to do for each roots as root. There we go. Validate returns Boolean, so we do is valid. We're going to do is valid is false up here too. And then we're going to, whoa. Okay, we don't need any of this. Oh, it is just what it is down there. Oh well. Well, no, it isn't actually. It isn't. It's slightly different. So, yeah. Is valid. We do if false 1 2 3 is valid. We break. I mean, we could just throw an exception. We could throw an exception at where the validator is, and then we could get the validator that has returned false, and then we could get the reason why that has thrown that exception. But you know, that needs to be that needs to be a Boolean. Because really, I mean, yeah, okay, yeah, really this is a utility rather than a, so this could be static, but then we have the issue of, well, we need to pass in validation, but the whole thing could be a static class, because I mean, it is, we only need to worry about this single method in this class. So it could be a static. Yeah, okay, yeah. I'm convincing myself it needs to be static. Because we're not doing anything else. We're not doing anything else. This is a public static function. And this is a static class. Oops, sorry. Is it class static, or do we have, hang on. I'll deal with that in a minute. So we pass that in, plus we pass the validation as well. Like so. Let's just make this a little bit easier to read. And we just do validation, validate. Yeah, I'm happy with that. We obviously need to change this a bit, because that's all it's doing. It's just validating the routes that have been processed. That's all. Obviously, now what we've gone and done is we've said, well, we need to process the routes first, all of them, before we go and validate them, which is a bit of a bind, because we are essentially looping over the routes twice. One to generate them all and then one to validate them. Whereas in the previous instance, what I was doing is I was validating them for every route that we were going down. However, thinking about other frameworks and how those work, they don't validate all the routes on the fly. So if you if you create a wrong route, for example, the whole site isn't going to crash, and that's a good thing. And that is a good thing. It'll only crash if you try and request a route which is broken. So so that's fine. Yeah, and in thinking about that, you could even have like a validate all of them and a validate one of them type affair. So the validation could even be done after, once the request has been parsed and captured. So that's fine. I'm not worried about that too much. Okay, so let's go back to the old bootstrap here. What are we doing? Well, we're not doing a new validator because it is static. It's a static class, so we could do validator, and then we could do validate, passing in the roots. That's the first thing, and also validation. That's the second thing that we need to pass through. And again, what I'm going to do is just bring this up here, like so. Now this, we don't need that, and we don't need that, and we don't need that, and we need to put that in. And we do is valid, boom. So that now, we now make the roots, we set the validation, we create the factory, which then makes the roots off of the roots that we've got from the roots.php file, that we then validate those roots. Okay. So, you know, that's kind of what I wanted to get out of my head with those processes. The next step would be to, well, first things first. Let's make sure that these tests run, right? Where are we? Come on. Run. Okay, so we still got 2 errors, so we really need to fix those. So this is an undefined method factory make. So this is where I'm hacking up the code and I'm not testing it as I go. So, okay, so undefined thingy make. This is factory test, undefined make. Yes. That should be add root. Okay, and the next one is the same thing, but that's on line 30. Again, that should be add root. Undefined class. Yeah, let's sort that out. There we go. Is that right? Yeah. Let's just make sure that these are all, yeah. Okay, cool. So they all run. 24 tests, they all run. I think we started today with 14. So we've created 10 new tests tonight, which is good. We've also sort of like established the business logic, if you will, of the creation of the roots to the point where in the bootstrap we have generated the roots, we've validated the roots. I guess we would throw an exception at some point. Perhaps in here. Perhaps if one is valid, we would throw an exception. Excuse me. I guess I could just check that. Possibly. Let's have a look. So in kernel, in config. All right. Yeah. In bootstrap, in validator, I mean, we're just going to throw an exception. So if that is false, we're going to throw new exception, and we're going to do validator failed. Let's just make a little bit more room. And yeah, let's put that back up here. Use exception. And what we could do is we know that for each route as route and validate. We know the route that we're trying to validate. So we could do that. Oh no, because we can't do dynamic classes, can we? That's frustrating, isn't it? Can we do... I thought we could do dynamic classes. I suppose what we could do instead, though, is we could just do get class. There we go. I mean, we could even go even further and actually throw an exception when we're doing the validation. So at this point, because now we know what the route is and what the validation is that we're trying to achieve here, we could do that. But for now, let's just, just as a quick check, sanity check, let's just throw an exception here. This is complaining because I need to adjust this. So we just remove that, and PHPstan will sort that all out. That's no problem. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly double check the old browser, make sure that this, I haven't actually done that yet. Need to make sure that this is coming through. Bear with me just a second. So let's do, what is it, 192.168, 192.168, 99.100. Let's bring that back into view. Okay, so the first error we have, if I go to the browser, that's not the right window. Bear with me just a second. Where's the window? Oh. So many windows open. I don't know which one it is. So I'm just going to create another one. And assign it to that one. So bear with me a moment. Properties, change that to yeah, Safari. It's not that one. It's not that one. It's none of these. It's not that. Let's just load it up in Chrome. Oh, it is. There we go. Here we go. Okay. Let's do. Okay, so we've got some major failures going on here. Bring that back into there. no such file in the boot, so it can't even find the root. So that's not very good, is it? Let's sort that out. Let's go back to the old Cody thing. The old Cody thing. So that's in the kernel. No, actually, it's in the bootstrap, line 7 here. So the base path can't find app roots. The base path is document root, and then that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to, from the from the bootstrap, we're just going to do a quick var dump of base path and just make sure that that has been set correctly. Which it appears to be. So that's going var web HTML and then public and then back one. So we're now in HTML. Okay, so that's the base path set. So base path has been set. So that would be in an app and then roots. Oh, I've changed the name, haven't I? So that's app and then that's config. And then that's routing, not roots. Okay, let's see what other failures are happening here. Obviously, I need to in wherever that's gone. src. No, sorry, public. No. Helper kernel. There we go. In the bootstrap, I'm still doing that var dump dying. So remove that. Next error is that the browser failed to open a directory public index. So require once public failed to open no such file directory. That's weird. That's weird. So that's gone to index.php. Okay, let's sort that out. No problem. Slowly going through all these. So we're now in an index.php. Require once. We're requiring. What are we requiring? Index on line 11, which is here. Ah, I see. Okay, yeah. Let's just comment that out. We do. Yeah, no, that should be fine. Let's save that. Because we're going into the kernel, we don't need to worry about this just yet. And we go to the browser. We got a white page, which I think is okay. It's not a 500 error because I wasn't printing anything out, which is fine. I should really be tailing the logs, to be honest, as I do this. So in helper in kernel, in bootstrap. Okay. So okay. So let's go and break something. And let's see if it throws an exception. Although, because I don't think these exceptions are going to be displayed to the page. I think what I need to do is actually see them in the logs. But let's just try it first. So let's go to the routing and let's just change this to be something like not found. So I'm now mimicking the one of the tests that we created before. And if I did a refresh of that and went to here, we can now see that we have validator failed. App helper root in blah 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 has failed. So that is the exception that we have thrown. Okay, so this is working. This is expected because we've put that in. If I went back to the code and change that to be index, and then went back to the browser and refresh the page, we get the white screen again because that's that's fine. That's cool. So yeah, that works to an extent. Let's go back. So yeah, I think that's a reasonable sort of 2 hours work, I suppose. I guess on a Twitch stream whilst I'm talking about the code, whilst I'm doing the code, this would have been done like a lot quicker. But I think that the streams are good because it's sort of showing my thought process as I do it. Although I am conscious that this is taking a lot of time to build, unfortunately. So the next stage would be to build the mechanism of actually parsing or pulling down the current URI of what the user has actually put into the request, and then matching the pattern and processing that. So there's still a bit to do. There's still a fair amount to do, but I think I'm going to leave it there, because I think we've got to a point where we've got all the tests passing. We've got 24 tests. We've also got the validation. Yeah, the validation working. It's conforming to PHPstan. We've tested it. We can actually see it on screen as it is working. So I think that is a good place to go. Now, before before I shoot, I should say that I'm going to continue these streams, and these streams will be making up this framework. So if you're interested in the process, the thought process of building sort of such an app, eventually this will become an invoice app. Eventually. So there's a number of things that we need to do. Once the routing is in place, I'm going to be working on the ORM, which is the repository, the entities, and all of that good stuff. And we're going to be doing this in a very similar process as we've done before. That we're going to do a little bit of TDD. We're not going to do a massive amount of TDD, but we're going to be doing a little bit like we did at the start of this. We're going to try and end each stream where we've made some decent progress. Like this one, we've started with 14 tests and we've finished with, 24 tests? So we've done, 10 extra tests tonight. Plus we've built a bootstrap, and we've wired up the components that we were building. So I want to have that sort of the similar momentum of each of these streams. And then once the routing's done, once the ORM stuff is done, and the MySQL is hooked up, we will then look at building a very non-complicated invoicing system. So this is where someone will create an invoice, they'll add invoice items to the invoice, and so forth. So it's not going to be a fully fledged invoicing system. But the whole point of this is that I have something that I can then use to teach object orientation. So I'll be teaching them the things that I'm sort of talking about in a sort of a slapdashy kind of way in these streams, but more in a sort of a teaching, sort of formulaic kind of manner. So yeah, if you want to come along for the ride, then please do follow, subscribe, do all of those bits and pieces as well. And also, if you know of anyone else who wants to learn this stuff as well, then more the merrier. Eventually, the course will be for FreeCodeCamp. So once this is done, I will then do the build the course, and the course will be done and edited. So it's not going to be like this Twitch live stream. If you've seen any of my other How to Code Well tutorials, it'll be a bit more like that. Or if you've seen some of my the packed stuff and the Manning stuff that I've done around Python and Docker, it'll be similar to that too. So I won't be actually doing the course on the stream. That will be for FreeCodeCamp. But getting to that point, building this framework, this will all be on the stream. So yeah, do join and say hello, put some thoughts down, and ask questions. I'm open to questions in the stream too. But yeah, thank you ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.